good morning or afternoon, peasants. How you doing? We're back for our second episode of season 2, The Dissident Days of Peasants' Perspective.
The Dissident Days.
The Dissident Days. Oh my gosh. Thank you for everybody who's joining us again, and for all the people who've joining us for the first time. Welcome. This is a continuation of the podcast that we did back in 2020 into 2021 called Peasants' Perspective that ultimately led to my federal incarceration due to my involvement in January 6th. And so we are back at it. We are kind of unpacking things. We're kind of working through all of the little technical glitches. We still can't play videos off of the laptops, so we'll incorporate that when we get it figured out. And we've got all kinds of little quirks here and there. But I know that what's most important is most people just want to hear our voices and hear the story.
Yeah, word of the day is dongle.
What?
The word of the day is dongle.
Dongle, yes. We need a new dongle to get this HDMI cable to work. So we're just having a good time. And one of the things in listening to the episode that we did last week, our first episode back, I realized that I forgot to give people ways that they can reach out to me. So thought, just some like housekeeping items that good podcast shows and radio shows do. And we didn't do any of that. So we just got on and started talking verbal diarrhea. So a couple places you can find me at Twitter, and this is currently my only social media home. You can find me at Twitter at Gone4Months. So Gone, the number 4 and months. And that's my Twitter. It'll come up as TJ6. And there's also another Twitter that's associated with the show that my wife maintained while I was gone called Peasants Per. So that's PEASANTS. PER is in perspective, Peasants Per, and that's on X as well. I still call it Twitter. It kind of barely became X before I got packed away into a 13th Amendment slave camp. But
it's hard to talk about a company that's named a letter.
Yeah. Although people are adjusting. So you can find me on X at Gone4Months. You can also support my family and kind of our journey back at our Give Send Go page, which is Give Send Go. And this is a little tricky. It's givesendgo.com/GEJWJ. If you go in there and search Taylor John Atakis or TJ6, I'll come up. But if you want to go straight to my page, it's givesendgo.com/GEJWJ. I don't know, it's what they randomly assigned us.
All right.
Anyway, so that's always there. And then we'll talk about this because it'll be something we'll talk about probably every episode to some degree or another. But my wife has a nonprofit that she started while I was incarcerated. And as you're initially incarcerated, you're kind of like getting over the initial shock. And then it's like, okay, so how are we going to survive? And so one of the things my wife was doing was she's got the family budget out and she's like, well, what do we cut? Right? Like we already lived pretty frugally. So what do we cut? The kids' swim team, daughter's guitar lessons, son's basketball. Like, so when a parent gets incarcerated, obviously everybody kind of has to go through the punishment. The whole family gets punished.
And all the extracurricular stuff and the whatever, it just goes away.
It just goes away. And that's really what was going on with our budget. Was my wife was just like, I'm going to have to cut all this stuff. And we had a family member who stepped up and said, hey, we'll pay for the kids' activities while Taylor's gone. And so that kind of gave birth to this nonprofit called Left Behind and Without, which you can find at leftbehindandwithout.org. And what that nonprofit is dedicated to doing is helping children with incarcerated parents do any type of productive activity, whether it's a sports program, basketball camp, basketball team. There's a family out in Ohio where the son is involved in a wrestling team. Dad's incarcerated, got the kid on a wrestling team. There's somewhere between 80 and 100 kids currently in the program, and it's going to this program's going to continue on. I think only one of those families was even a J6 family, believe it or not. So this is a really good program. My wife's been working a lot with the Washington State Department of Corrections, and because you really have to look at all of the problems in society as what's the solution? The solution to every problem is pretty much I am, right? When you look at every problem and you go, how can I be the solution? What can I do to best fix whatever the problem is that I'm looking at? Whether it's a big worldwide problem, maybe the best solution is I am, so I'm going to vote. Or if you're looking at some corrupt corporations, what's the best solution? I am, so don't spend your money with corrupt corporations and companies that hate you and stuff like that. Well, when it comes to fixing our country's criminal justice system, I am the solution. So how can you best be the solution? Well, let's start off by stopping the cycle of incarceration, because that is one of the biggest problems that our country faces. Is once families get into the incarceration cycle, it's very, very difficult to get out.
They start to feel the impact, and the impacts keep coming.
Yes. And so it starts, to me, the kids are the easiest low-hanging fruit. 1 in 28 children in America has an incarcerated parent. That means on average, one kid in every elementary school classroom, right, has an incarcerated parent. That kid's at risk.
It doesn't get the parent out, but it softens the impact on the youngsters.
It gives them something to do, something to work for, something to have hope for, something to just, if they're doing sports or music lessons, there's discipline. There's a lot of lessons that you get through these extracurriculars. It can't replace the parent, but it can at least do something and take the pressure off the family.
And on the topic of nonprofit adjacent, I mean, we've been doing this since we started for nothing. It's been basically just a calling and service. I've decided that that's not the way to reach people. We were having a hard time reaching, and I think that we do need to have an income stream or some way of monetizing this to actually reach people, because it's weird how monetized channels spread faster.
It's because you got something on the some skin in the game. Right.
Yeah.
So you paid for it. You're going to listen to it. Right.
Yeah. And then
Absolutely.
You're more likely to share because now it's part of your ethos.
Exactly. So leftbehindandwithout.org, you can go visit that. There's a donate now button. And that is a registered nonprofit 501c3 or whatever it is. Anyways, point is, if you make financial contributions there, it's tax deductible. So especially if you want to make larger contributions, way better to actually give it to the kids than give it to the government who's just going to house the prisoner. Right. If you've got to choose between paying some taxes, getting or getting a deduction, get the deduction, help the kids, right? Be the solution you want to see in the world. And then the last thing is on our website, which is buzzsprout.com. And let's see, we've got a podcast website. It's buzzsprout.com/2450662. I don't know. We'll have to incorporate this into Peasants Perspective at some point. But there is a link there where you can subscribe to the show and make a monthly contribution, and we would greatly appreciate those. So now that we've got our panhandling out of the way, we'll repeat that every 15 minutes. But, I wanted to get that stuff, on here and recorded before I forgot about it at the end. But those are different ways that you can support us. And we do need the support. This podcast was a work of love when we did it before, and it's going to need to be a little bit more than that for us now. So every little bit helps. Don't forget there's like hosting expenses and things like that. So just covering the cost of the show. Don't think that your small monthly contribution doesn't make a difference. It really does.
Yeah.
So, and then the Gifts In Go, of course, that's just kind of getting me and my family back on our feet and giving us some runway while we get work all figured out and whatnot. And then, of course, don't forget to find us on, don't forget to find me on X at Gone 4 Months, which is my vanity name. It's funny on, I never called these things vanity names. What else would you call it? I guess it's a vanity name,
pseudonym,
what's your IG, bro? What's your Twitter? So when I was in trial, right, they'd gotten subpoenas for all my social media. So of course the FBI agent, when they testify, that goes through your phone and your social media, they get up there, well, we got it from the subpoena to Twitter, and the subpoena was returned with all of the data on this date, and we matched up the data with the unique device ID that we got from the warrant, and so they match up that your phone is in fact the phone that put in the tweet or whatever it is they're going to use as evidence, right?
Super CSI.
Yes, it's very, very, everything's got to be verified, how they got it, that it's valid, passes all the parole evidence rules and stuff like that. But at one point, and keep in mind, I didn't put up a defense. Like, I didn't see any real reason in trying to fight these people.
Sure.
And so, but at one point they put up this vanity name, and my old vanity name used to be @PeasantPod, which I changed to Gone 4 Months when I got indicted, which now I can't change back. Apparently you get like one chance to change those. But anyways, it was @PeasantsPod. Well, then, so he went through this intricate thing on how he'd gotten my phone and the device ID and everything. Well, then he puts up another vanity name that was @PeasantsPod_. And then he went, and I got this one off of the Google Wayback Machine. So, they went through the effort of getting warrants and getting all the returns from the social media companies. But then for the most damning tweets of all, he used the Google Wayback Machine, right? So he couldn't, anyways, I was like, objection? I don't think that's mine. Do you have any evidence it's not? I'm like, I can't prove the negative. You know what I mean? Like, no, I don't have any evidence that it is. Anyways, I thought that was a weird thing, that there was just like this fabricated Twitter. I've never used an underscore in any email address, vanity name, or anything ever that I can think of.
It's possible that it could have been added by, automatically by some algorithm there.
Like they're spoofing your account rather than copying it or just archiving it?
We're a conspiracy show, so you can automatically jump to that, but I always try to like give the benefit of the doubt or try to figure out, is there some way that this could have happened just normally? I don't know.
I thought that too. I thought, well, maybe when they archived it, it did that, but then why wouldn't he just get it off of the subpoenaed files? Again, going through a federal court case, everybody who goes through one kind of just can't believe what just happened to them. Yeah. You know what I mean? Especially if you're on like the non-violent crime. Like if you killed someone, raped someone, you kind of, what's coming, right? But when you're kind of in this margin of you broke some statute or I was in with one guy who had an illegal silencer for his firearms. Okay. Now, long story here, but real basic story is he's driving in his wife's truck, and they're both registered suppressor owners. They own multiple suppressors. They're all registered, all have their tax stamps. Okay. Well, apparently once you get one of those, the rules are pretty tight. So he's driving in his wife's car. It's got her duffel bag with her target rifle with the suppressor on it. He gets pulled over. The pullover is kind of a nonsense pullover, right? It turns out that there wasn't really probable cause for the pullover, but nonetheless, he gets pulled over. Okay. Officer sees the duffel bag, recognizes it as a gun bag, wants to look in it, looks in it, sees the suppressor, freaks out. Of course, he doesn't have the paperwork on him, and when he does get the paperwork, it's got his wife's name on it. Right. So this triggers a warrant for them to go into his house. They bring the jaws of life in order to pop his gun safe. They've taken him into custody, right? When they open up the gun safe, he's got multiple suppressors, some of his wife's, some of his. All of the suppressors they have tax stamps and all the appropriate registration paperwork, but he's got one. He's got one homemade suppressor kit that he ordered online. And when you order it online, you have to fill out the paperwork, send it in, send it back, and then you drill in the last bit on top, right? Well, he'd already drilled it. So he's a legal suppressor owner, right? He's legal, all this, and they ended up hitting him with illegal possession of a machine gun, because in the gun world, a machine gun and a suppressor are the same thing. So he got charged with that, and he got charged with a couple other things, which they ended up dropping everything. But he spent 3.5 years in jail in a detention center from this pullover to finally taking a plea deal. But what ultimately happened was he was pulled over because he didn't have two lights on his license plate at night, and apparently you only have to have one. It just has to be illuminated. It doesn't necessarily have to be two bulbs. Well, so that the fact the cop didn't have probable cause should have squashed the preceding warrants. But in this situation, what started to happen was it was his wife's car, and so she was trying to get the ticket squashed, but the traffic court had taken like the entirety of the 3 years to do. They weren't doing anything. They weren't dismissing this ticket, right? Which would have then negated the warrants. And then what started to happen was his wife started getting target letters from the ATF basically saying, hey, since your husband, who wasn't on the tax stamp, was in possession of that suppressor, we're considering charging you with, not maintaining control of your suppressors or whatever.
This is a pretty long synopsis.
Yeah, well, I mean, I heard this story over the course of weeks. So yeah, but basically the ATF was going to target his wife, right? Because he was ultimately, probably through the legal proceedings, going to have everything dropped because of the warrant being squashed. So then it was like this pressure game. So he ended up taking a plea deal so that his wife wouldn't get prosecuted.
Oh my gosh.
Right. And so when I met him, he was in his last couple months of what ended up being a 41-month or 48-month sentence for essentially having a suppressor that wasn't registered, even though he's a legal owner of other suppressors.
Because he drilled a hole too soon.
I mean, it really, truly, like, the way that this gets off the rails is, okay, well, let's say they create some type of registration database for firearms. Okay, well, you've got a couple firearms that you bought recently, they're registered, but you've got a couple that you inherited from grandpa, they're not registered. Next thing you know, the laws get written in such a way, the grandfathering time comes and goes. They come into your house and you're like, oh, hey, this old 12 gauge shotgun that doesn't even fire, this isn't registered. How'd you acquire this? You're like, my grandpa? He's like, is he around to prove that he gave it to you? Does he have paperwork? It's like, no, he's dead.
I wish he was.
Yeah, I'd give the fire gun, the gun away to get my grandpa back.
You know, every time I hear about one of these stories about some stupid gun law that somebody violated and they're in jail for whatever, I always think to myself, what does shall not infringe mean? I don't know. Infringe. I think they think of infringe as like sewing the hem on your garment. So it's like, we're just going to make all these laws that just get stuck. I don't know. I don't know either.
No, it does. I don't know. There was a guy that I knew that he was in there for drug charges. Okay. So his were a little unique, and I don't know the full extent of the story, but essentially it involved dressing up as cops, going and robbing other drug dealers. Ooh. And then, of course, so it was a whole series of things. Anyways, he got like 12 years for this, right?
Okay.
Really good guy. Which is really funny. I mean, I remember taking a survey when I first got there. It was like, do you hang around with felons? It was like, well, I didn't.
I do now.
I do now. Yeah. Like, I didn't have friends that were criminals, but I do now. Thank you very much.
Can you help me out with that? I don't want to hang out with him.
It was a really good guy. But while we were, so I think he's at 9 years. He's got like another year and a half left for his good time, and maybe 2 years, something like that. But he's kind of on the way out for where he's at in his sentence. And one day I see him out on the track. And I'm like, hey, how you doing? Because he'd always catch up with me and we'd talk politics and stuff. And he goes, my son died. Oh, what do you mean? This is his 20-year-old son had just died of a fentanyl overdose.
Oh no.
And this is a son that's been, he was 12 when he got incarcerated.
Right.
And so he's basically raised his son through visitations and letters. He actually published a book of letters to his son and, really tried like hard to be a good dad, but his son just got caught up in literally just the accept me crowd and got, moved in with a girl. And next thing you know, he's using a little bit of drugs and gets a little bit of that fentanyl and gets an overdose. So here's this guy sitting in prison, right, on drug charges, and he's like, I want the death penalty for whoever sold my kid those drugs.
Oh boy.
Right. And so when I think of like gun crimes and stuff like that, this is where we were going with it. I started to have a lot more sympathy just seeing how guns impact these communities. I can see where a mother or a grandmother who's lost a kid to gun crime has another kid sitting in prison for gun crimes, right? And is afraid to go out after dark because of gun crimes. Why the inclination would be, can we just get rid of the guns? You know what I mean? Like, I can see where in their mind, they're just like, stop selling them and eventually we'll run out of guns, right? Which to anybody who kind of thinks anything is going to think logically that's not going to work, but it's the same thing. Why don't you just get rid of all the fentanyl? It's like, we're going to try, you know what I mean? But there's a lot floating around.
Well, that's like trying to fix the obesity epidemic by banning butter knives. If we get rid of all these butter knives, people will stop eating butter.
Putting butter on their bagels. But again, it comes down to the solution is always I am. So what's the solution to gun crime? I am the solution. That means responsible gun ownership, teaching my children how to use guns responsibly.
Yes.
When I'm not a big proponent of just everybody walking around with guns. Like, I think if you're going to walk around concealed carry, just be careful. You know what I mean? Like, just be careful. Like, you never know when you're self-defense, you're the one now defending it as being on the offense. You know what I mean? Like, just be careful.
Yep.
I like a lot of these new, like, Byrna personal defense shooters. Have you seen any of that stuff? Oh, it's like basically it's like a handgun, but it shoots a pepper ball instead of a bullet.
Oh, yeah. I have seen those.
Yeah. It's like all the rage with like conservative podcasters and new radio hosts, these burner launchers and stuff.
Sure,
like
it's
that.
the less lethal option, but less lethal is kind of get you in some
It can get
bad
you in
situations.
just as much trouble. Yeah, but you probably wouldn't be facing a murder charge.
Yeah.
That was really interesting was watching in prison was that whole Daniel Penny episode going on in New York. You don't know what I'm talking about?
Taylor, the reason you originally brought me on here because I don't know crap, because I don't pay attention, and I'm just trying to live my life, and I've maintained that level of interest in a lot of garbage, especially in politics. You can ask me who the mayor of pick a town. I don't know.
So there was this Daniel Penny was on a subway in New York, and there was another man that was on the subway that was basically yelling, threatening other passengers, and Daniel Penny got him in a chokehold, and he eventually died because of this chokehold.
Okay.
And apparently this guy had a huge K2 drug use problem. K2 is the drug that's all over the prisons. It's like they call it synthetic marijuana. It's roach spray. It's really... It's gross.
Ugh.
Anyways, I didn't realize it was as big a thing on the outside as it is on the inside of prisons. So it's really easy for people to smuggle in, and that's why it's so prevalent in the prisons. But anyways, Daniel Penny, acting in self-defense and in protection of others, I mean, he was this close from getting a nice multi-decade sentence on Rikers Island. It's really, really tricky out there. It was the same thing with that Kyle Rittenhouse. Remember him?
Mm-hmm. I do remember him.
This close to a life sentence, man. That stuff drives me. Having been in prison now, oh my gosh, when I think of these like 20-year, 25, 30-year prison sentences, ugh.
Yeah,
It's a life. So when I first when I was in Oklahoma, I met up with one inmate who I ended up making it all the way to Missouri with, and he was from a Native American tribe, and he said in their tribe, so like if you get something local, says the longest they have for a prison sentence is 9 years, even for murder. 9 years is the longest you can get.
Okay. And
he goes, because the tribe has determined that 9 years is a whole new life. Like after 9 years, you're not really
interesting.
Any punishment and rehabilitation would have been done by 9 years. Beyond that, you're just wasting a life. You're wasting tribal resources, and you're wasting the person's life, right?
So it's like a 9-year reset.
It's like a 9-year reset. Yeah. Huh. So like the maximum you can get there is 9 years. 9 years are going to parole you out or whatever. I have thought about that so much, and I'm like, I kind of feel like the average time that a person in the United States serves for murder is only 7 years. Now, you take your infamous murders that get life sentences, but then a lot of like your homicide, negligent manslaughter, those all end up much lower. I've thought that too. I'm like, why wouldn't you just max out everything at 9 years and then put people on probation? Like 9 years is a long time. Yeah,
I've only thought about this for 30 seconds, but my initial thought was somebody's going to go, well, 9 years isn't that long. Maybe I can just get away with a couple of murders. But, for all the other, manslaughter, whatever, that totally makes sense. Have a max.
I always just think at 9 years, you've destabilized anybody's outside life. Right. So their kids have moved on, families moved on. Likelihood of the marriage surviving is probably under 5%. Right. Their job skills have atrophied. So that's all moved on.
The job market's moved on.
Their criminal enterprise has moved on without them.
Yep.
Right. Whatever it was, if they had one. And so at 9 years, it's like, okay, well, that's where this is more about rehabilitation and less about punishment. Like punishment is taking them out of the world for a decade. And then rehabilitation is figuring out a way to get them back in. You know what I mean? Anyways, I met a lot of inmates that had 10, 15-year sentences, and that's like the sweet spot for the feds. They do a lot of that 10 to 15, and it doesn't make any sense to me, man. Like you have victimless crimes that are serving 10 and 15 years. And then you have victim crimes where people are getting 20 months, 14 months, Anyways, that's one thing with my January 6th experience was talk about getting to see the world from a whole different point of view, right? Never, ever, ever associated with criminal mindset people, never, ever associated with anybody that'd been in trouble with the law in any significant way. Like, you know, I had a friend who had a DUI and I was like, oh my gosh, you know, are they going to take your house? You know what I mean? Like,
jeez.
and so to go to like federal prison and be there with like the big guys, it was different. It definitely come out with like a different perspective on what's serious and what's not. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What have you heard about Donald Trump taking out the USAID?
Oh, I have heard about that. Elon Musk is apparently helping him, you know, go through some spreadsheets and doing a mini audit at it and finding out where are these millions going, and let's whack that. Yeah.
So USAID, right? And normally we would kind of follow the story for a long time. So we would kind of build in all the context we need. But for most people to basically understand, USAID is United States.
Do I got to look it up?
Yeah. It was.
I'll let you look it up. But a lot of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and this is the
U.S. Agency for International Development.
Okay.
So the phrase aid, you know, U.S. aid makes people think that there's a lot of like charity money going.
Yeah, like
there.
farm aid.
And there's none.
None.
None of this is charity. This is all investment money. So this is like, hey, yeah, we'll help you build those train tracks for a royalty, right? Or for a defense contract or for whatever. So the USAID was used basically by the State Department as a front group for CIA soft power influence and peddling. And also another big source that USAID has been funding is a lot of media, right? So as we take a journey through world history, and specifically American history in the last century, right, we have this intelligence apparatus, the CIA, the old OSS, right? And over time, in my opinion, from my observations, the intelligence agencies have become that sub-government, right? It's like the brain. You've got the government that's all for show, and then you've got the permanent state, the deep state, the administrative state. And a lot of those people operate around the intelligence services. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that is because they're the most intelligent. Like literally, right? They're the ones playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
You got to have the right CV to get the job.
Yes. So the CIA has involved itself in pretty much every agency. They're involved in the NIH and the health agencies. They're involved in the education agencies. They're involved in broadcast agents. I mean, they basically figured out a way to manipulate the world to be the government, right? The mind control of the world through all the different agencies, not just throughout the U.S., but the UN and other countries as well. And then USAID has been the piggy bank for all of that, because you can get all kinds of crazy grants for whatever you want. Money goes to a foundation, which is qualified, and then the foundation gets to disperse the funds, and there's no real qualification on who they disperse the funds to and all that kind of stuff.
Well, all those non-governmental agencies are able to pass the money out because they're not the government, but they get the money from the government.
Yes.
It's kind of a weird, tricky Monty thing.
So a couple things I've seen, right? So first of all, we're finding out that this is how Mockingbird Media has been paid. So when we go through the last century and we think, what are the big scandals that we've discovered as a country? Well, there was that one thing that Mockingbird Media, right? The CIA had people in all the news channels. Yeah. And did they agree to stop doing that? Well, no, but we know about it. Okay, so we know about it from congressional hearings, but there was no follow-up as if they stopped doing that.
And business as usual.
Right. So when we look at things like CNN or MSNBC or Fox, and we're like, these guys are just company news channels. Like, they're just towing the company line. Like, clearly the MSNBC is like straight DNC propaganda. CNN is straight like international intelligence propaganda. You've got Fox News, which is clearly just an RNC propaganda.
And we saw a lot of this. Each of you listening to this right now, remember the 2020 election cycle, and all through COVID, all of the news agencies at 6 a.m. would all have the exact same headline. How is that possible?
Yeah, there's a coordinated media thing going on. So then the question would be, well, where's it coordinated from? Right? Well, follow the money. Well, the pharmaceutical companies put a lot of ads. Yeah, but the pharmaceutical ad reps aren't calling up saying, report on this. They're calling up saying, don't report on that bad study, right?
Right.
And like, so it's like, where's it coming from? Well, it turns out USAID was funding like Politico. $8 million. New York Times, some other multi-million-dollar contract. Subscriptions to the tune of like 35,000 subscriptions for Washington Post.
Well, you got to make your subscription numbers come up. It makes it look like people are looking.
And cash flow, especially when you don't have to deliver the newspapers.
Yeah.
Right? So you're going through all this. In Ukraine, 11 of the 12 news agencies are funded by USAID. So, of course, they're all basically, now we see where the money's coming from. So, yeah, Elon Musk and his little team of computer whizzes went in there, plugged in their computers or whatever, and essentially went, this is a mess, shut it down. Right. So they shut down USAID this last weekend, which is like, of all the things that I know about how the government's structured, I would have thought they were going to come in, do some cleaning house, the DOJ, FBI, probably root out some people in the State Department. Definitely when Robert Kennedy gets to the HHS, you're going to see some turnover at the CDC and the NIH and these different, the ones who've recently scorned us. But things like USAID, I honestly didn't think they would even get to. Like, I thought it would be kind of one of those things where they maybe go through and get rid of a couple grants or some of the really dumb, transgender Pakistani flamingos or whatever. Right. But instead, they just completely deleted the whole thing. And then the reaction that you're getting from like the Democrats and from the swamp is crazy because you can't create a real adequate defense for fraud. Does that make sense? Like, okay, if you want to go defend George Soros, well, I saw a thing saying that George Soros is somehow, through his NGOs, USAID has funneled something like $270 million through his NGOs, which then he was turning around and dumping back into American politics to get local prosecutors and all the different people that he backs.
So he's
not even using his own billions; he's using the government's own tax money to play partisan politics with it.
Yeah, so think about your experience in court with the cell phone and how they like tracked the IP address and all wherever it was pinging, and they were able to prove that this was you and this is your handle and these are your words. Well, they'd have to do the same thing with George Soros for every little teeny thing they wanted to investigate or pick apart. Forget that. Just take away all of their ability to do these funding through these tentacles that shouldn't be allowed anyways. And now you've cut off their ability to funnel money, and it really just kind of puts them back in their place. Now they have to just function within their department.
Well, and they put a stop to all payments, right? At the Treasury, they kind of did these things in conjunction. So what that did was just even a momentary stop. It's like, okay, so if you're putting your hand up saying, well, I need money. Well, why do you need it? For soup cans for kids in Africa. Okay, here's the money for the soup cans. Why are you raising your hand? What do you need money? I have an art show that I was going to buy some stuff from Hunter Biden. You know what I mean? Like, oh yeah, you're not going to have your hand in the air waiting for your money because you can't validate what you're going to use it for. So when it's not business as usual and you actually have to go in and verify why you urgently need your payment, you better have soup cans for kids in Africa and not, well, I have a black tie engagement that I was going to do, and I need money for all the, I need the money. Just give me the money. I love it. I am so excited seeing what Donald Trump has been able to just come in and just do. Like, I really thought getting out of here, I thought we'd be running this podcast a little bit faster, but following the news every day, like, I can't even keep track of it. There's just so much going on. And there's a lot of false information going on as well. Yesterday, one of the things I saw floating around was that Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, was implicated in a criminal complaint in the assassination attempt against Donald Trump.
Oh.
So somebody made a criminal complaint saying Josh Shapiro was part of a conspiracy to assassinate Donald Trump. And so this kind of went viral on the internet before it came out that that complaint had basically been squashed as a go nowhere.
Right.
But,
so what's the barrier for filing a complaint? $20 or
there's
zero?
no barrier. You just send something in, right?
Yeah.
Like this is the whole trope. Well, you're under investigation. Well, will you hurry up and determine if I did anything wrong? Because saying you're under investigation, that's like
the news cycle is running.
Yeah, like everybody's under investigation. I remember one time a building code inspector was like, we operate off complaint. So if your neighbors like you, you can pretty much murder and get away with it. But if your neighbors don't like you, you probably can't even fart without getting a complaint call in. Then you're just constantly under investigation. And they did the same thing with Russiagate. A couple false media things, get a warrant, boom, FBI's confirming you're under investigation.
Yep.
See what I'm saying? It's like, it doesn't mean, they could launder in fake stuff. So just watch out. I've definitely been victim to fake news many, many times. And a couple things I always remember is the too good to be true additive, right? If something's just too good to be true, check the sourcing really, really well. One thing I've also learned in this journey, though, is that truth is stranger than fiction. So just because it's too good to be true doesn't necessarily always mean it's not true. Yeah. But checking that sourcing, it was really quickly apparent that Shapiro was not involved in a conspiracy to assassinate Donald Trump.
Wow.
So
good.
Just be, I want to address the QE stuff.
Okay.
Q. You remember Q, our good friend Q?
Are we talking about Q or are we talking about quantity easy?
QAnon.
QAnon. Oh, okay.
QAnon has ruined so many lives. When we were in jail,
the QAnon shaman.
Well, when we were in jail, everything that would happen, this goes back to our opening discussion yesterday of paranoid ideation.
Okay.
Right. Everything that would happen, there would be an instant buzz that we would get from the community. People would be messaging people and, and we'd be like, this is a deep state op one way or the other. Right. Mm-hmm. So do you remember when the Francis Scott Key Bridge got hit by that big boat? Yeah. So I remember waking up watching that pretty much live. Oh my gosh. And there was so many rumors about the bridge had to be taken out because deep state this, and we got to rebuild the bridge, and deep state that, and it's going to cripple the economy, and they're trying to get rid of the election, and they want to be in such a financial panic that they can call it a financial emergency and cancel the election. Like right. Every little thing, every little possible way came out as to why this was either a good guy operation or a bad guy operation. Right.
Even myself, I was like going, did they do this on purpose? It's like, my gosh. But, I talked to a maritime pilot that I just happened to know and asked him, what he thought about it, how he felt about it. And he's like, yeah, it looks pretty legit, like it was an accident. And, he talked to me about how long it takes to slow one of these things down. They're super heavy. They got a lot of momentum. It could take miles. And it just sounds like there was a real failure of, it had some tugboats that were supposed to be with it on the way out, and they just left early, thought, oh, everything's good, we're going home. And it was just an accident. It's what it kind of...
That's what I think, too.
Yeah.
Which, we haven't heard a whole lot about it, right? Because, of course, the FBI was on top of it, so...
Well, and if it had been used as an excuse for other things, which it really wasn't, so it kind of makes it look even more like an accident the more time passes.
So this is where the discussion always led me. So you've got Rahm Emanuel, Trump's old right-hand man, who used to say, never let a good crisis go to waste.
Exactly.
But then you've got the conspiracy world who goes, they're creating all these crises.
Right. And then they just pick and choose which ones that they want to use.
Yeah. And I definitely, so after having kind of lived through January 6th, which by its own right, I think is a false flag. Right. Oh. And there's, I really do think that they operate they operate more on never let a good crisis go to waste. I don't think they operate on let's go create all the crises. Right. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like that bridge thing, I definitely think, I just, look, Occam's Razor to me, they had an electrical problem. It's an old junky boat.
Yep.
And can you imagine what they were doing in the pilot house when they couldn't get the systems back online?
Yeah, I
know
can.
What I mean? Like
they were crapping bricks.
You had a couple boat experiences.
Oh yeah,
you know, exactly. Like,
yeah.
Like, no, we did not plan on running aground.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been in the middle of experiences like that.
So Ron's background runs through commercial fishing, so he's being very serious.
Yeah, my boat did run aground at least once. Anyways,
so
moving on.
I'm like, I don't think they were up there going, "Oh, this is going to tank the American economy, the election." I think they were more like,
No.
"Hey, can you
No.
get those breakers going back on?" You know? But we would hear, like, you know, thing after thing, and even with like the January 6th with us individually, it was like, well, you've got the bigger narrative on what's going on, but you have my case. Mm-hmm. Like, my case doesn't seem to match up with the bigger narrative, and neither does anybody else's case. But on a whole, we'd watch the news and we're like, well, that's not true. Or, you know, like, I'd even, before I got remanded, there was a pretty good group of people online that were pretty certain all these J6ers, because there's not a lot, 1,500 over the span of the U.S. isn't very many of us, right?
No.
And it was like, I mean, that's just like a super church congregation.
It's like 0% of the population of the country.
Yeah, it's like a really good high school play. You can get 1,000 people to show up. You know what I mean? So there's not a lot of us ultimately. And they were like, "Oh, you guys are being held up in some resort in Florida, or, you know, you guys are like," it's like, "What are you talking about, man? I'm in solitary confinement now," or, you know, I meant like, but the conspiracies going on all the way. And one of the things that we always remember is we're only as good as the information we get. So we want to make sure that we're always looking at as much information as possible. We're always trying to get to the original sourcing, and we're always trying to play devil's advocate with ourselves. Right? The easiest explanation is usually the easiest explanation. Corruption absolutely exists, but I think that a lot of the corruption we see is the baked into the cake corruption. It's just, it's like, it's the way the system works. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So being in prison, it's just my new, you know, it's the most recent thing, but it's a microcosm of life. So you would see in there, like, as an orderly, I wasn't allowed, like, the guards can't give you anything. It's just standard rule. Like, can't give you anything. They can't give you a pen. They can't give you anything. Like, it's just, they can't give you anything. Guards, if you need something, you got to go talk to, you know, whoever has the things that they're supposed to give you. But like,
because it can't be a pathway for
there's
bad
no favors,
stuff.
No nothing, right?
Yeah.
But clearly, operating in an environment with humans, you know, you're going to have an affinity to certain inmates or certain people, things like that. So at one point, I had a job as an orderly over facilities, and one of the perks of that job was I got some fresh coffee.
Ooh.
Right. So I'd make coffee for them, and then a couple times a day I'd go dump the carafe and make new coffee. And they had drip coffee versus the instant coffee that we had. And so when I would go dump their coffee, I'd get my cup of coffee. Now, I would have been terrified. I never ever wrote this on email or said it on the phone because, right, you don't want to like have anybody looking. But that little bit of like corruption where, you know, you get to skim the coffee off the top, it's baked into the cake. Like, when I got the job, that was like one of the, like, hey, you get coffee.
It's the unwritten perk.
It's the unwritten perk. Exactly. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many times I saw that same thing happen with the guards. Like, yeah, we're ordering lumber and a little more. You know what I mean? Or yeah, I'm taking that 50-pound bag of chicken home with me to my kids. You know, the guards, you know, the kitchen guard would say, like, it's just baked in everywhere. And I think when you get into like the District of Columbia, USAID, just I mean, what's $1 million? What's 10 million? What's 100 million?
Well, do you know what their budget was?
Just a couple.
It was huge.
It was huge, yeah.
Huge.
But it's like you got 5 million going here and 150,000 going there, and you know, like, some of them are small numbers, some of them are really big numbers. Like, I don't know, how much do you think the political right staff is? Do you think $8 million would cover their annual salary? I mean, how many reporters do they really have?
Yeah,
it's a blog, right? Seems like $8 million would be enough to cover their entire operating expense. Who knows?
I don't know.
But I think it's just baked in everywhere. Everywhere you look, it's just like baked in. And the only way you can be the solution is to be the solution for what you see in front of you. You know?
Yeah.
Fix it. Wherever you're at, fix it. What do you think about the bunch of these FBI and DOJ people getting fired?
What do I think about it?
Yeah.
Well, maybe you didn't know this about. You probably didn't know this about me, but when I was younger, a youth, a friend of mine, a close friend of mine, his father was in the FBI. And there's a thing called FBI cadets where you can kind of, go on a tour with your local cop kind of thing, but you're touring with your local FBI guy. And so I joined the FBI cadets for a little while. It didn't last that long because it's very structured.
Because you're a screw up.
Yeah, well, it's just very structured, and it was over in Seattle, and it's just too far, and it just got to be kind of too hard to deal with. But those FBI dudes, some of those dudes they're very smart. They're very great. They're great guys. All the people I ran into were professional. But people are people, and I don't know what some of these people were up to. And if some of these people were up to some bad stuff, they probably need to be fired. I don't know how they decided who to let go, but surely some of them needed to be let go.
So there's this interesting, the debate kind of looks like this to me. So anytime you're dealing with a government employee, there's this and not every time, but typically when you're dealing with certain government employees, if they've taken an oath of office, right? So that oath of office typically says that they'll uphold the Constitution, so help me God, right?
Yep.
But it ties their loyalty and fealty to the Constitution itself. And then you've got people who want your loyalty and fealty to be to the chain of command, right? Like, do what we say. As long as we say you'll do it, we'll have your back. Does that make sense? You know what I'm saying? And I've heard, it's funny because the Democrats right now will criticize, well, Donald Trump just wants loyalty and he wants people to have loyalty to him and do what he says, even if it's not lawful. But then on the other side, they're like, we want you to have an oath to the Constitution, which says, do whatever we tell you to do.
Nah,
you know what I mean?
That's not what it says.
Follow the chain of command.
Yeah.
And I thought it's so funny because at no point in this whole, the people who want you to follow the chain of command, follow the Constitution, but then that no one is in charge of the Constitution. You know what I mean? Like ultimately they want to excuse all bad behavior as long as you were doing it in the name of the government. Then it must have been good at some point. There must have been some consideration for net benefit for the people. And therefore, even if it was a net negative, well, we were trying. It's like COVID. Like, well, we were trying to do the right thing.
That comes back to what does shall not infringe mean?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So with the chain of command thing, I'm hearing like, okay, so I think the last count I saw was like 88 DOJ and FBI agents were walked out.
Okay.
Right. And there's like 17 FBI departments or heads, divisions, whatever they are, locations, like the Miami field office got walked out.
Okay.
Great. Right. Got to clean it up a little bit. But now there's like lawsuits going into court to try to prevent Trump from going any deeper and firing into these people. And they're trying to say, oh, we were just doing our jobs. But it does come down to that. Okay, so if I'm a regular line item FBI agent and I see my FBI doing corrupt things, so where's your duty to the oath then? Where's your duty to the chain of command then? You know what I mean? Like, where do we stand as an American people? Like, is it ever okay for law enforcement to?
Well, that's where you're supposed to be able to have whistleblowers that can come forward and say things, but lately it seems like we treat whistleblowers pretty poorly.
Yeah. So I'm in prison.
Oh.
And trying to think how to tell this story without implicating the person.
Oh boy.
Basically, this guard was like, yeah, we do this project and this project gets a lot of perks for the people involved in it that orchestrate it on the management side. You get a lot of recognition, a lot of kudos, a lot of political power, soft power, influence, right? As they always call it, pull gets you a lot of pull. Right. Okay. And then the guard proceeds to tell me how it's breaking all the rules of all the financial rules because the product that we're making is worth over $25. It's worth, a factor of 100 of that. And he's like, I could be a whistleblower and he's naming the statutes, like statute such and such, such and such, statute such, like he's actually naming the statutes. I could be a whistleblower, but it would like all my bosses would be implicated. And like, it goes all the way up to the director of the BOP. And I don't think it would go anywhere and it'd probably ruin my life. And so he's basically like, so essentially what I got from the conversation was I'm in prison and I'm now being forced to participate in a criminal enterprise.
Wow.
For your guys' benefit and gain. You know what I mean? I was like, okay.
So you guys are making like candlestick holders.
I don't want to be, I'm sure at some point it'll slip out, but for the moment while it's super fresh, I'll just say, there was a criminal enterprise running inside of the BOP and everybody knew it. But the guy's going, but the director of the BOP is involved, so it just doesn't seem like it'd be really beneficial to whistleblow. I was like, yeah, for this, it probably wouldn't be. But in principle, it's like, this is the problem everywhere,
So there's some high-end license plates you guys are making.
Basically,
and
yeah.
Selling
Real
them on the sly.
license plates.
Yeah. Okay.
No, that's okay, so these FBI agents and DOJ guys that have all been fired, when I see people like, we need to protect them because they were just doing their job. I'm like, your job is to uphold the Constitution.
Yeah.
So if we're making an argument that you violated the Constitution and you infringed upon your fellow citizens' rights, like you can't just always go back and hide behind the immunity shield of government. Well, it's the same thing
as in war. When a soldier goes out in war, there are rules of engagement. It's not just a free for all.
No. Yeah, exactly. So I'm really curious to see how deep he goes in the FBI and the DOJ. In my opinion, you've got to go really deep. Like really deep. I'm not hoping for prosecution or anybody goes to jail, but like there has to be answers to why the 1512 obstruction of Congress charge got used. There has to be answers as to why, people who had misdemeanor charges were getting tanks in their front yards and stuff.
According
like that.
to the letter I got from your judge after I sent in a letter of recommendation or a letter of support or whatever you want to call it, they needed to set examples.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's funny how they use a lot of floof, and then when they say the thing, you're like, okay.
Oh.
So that's really what this is about.
Yeah, it was 8 or 9 pages to say, yeah, we need to set an example.
Yeah. Because we don't want other good guys coming out and protesting.
Yeah.
So one of the other things, interesting thing about that. So what he's referring to is when I got sentenced, a lot of people, as a show of support, wrote letters to the judge, basically telling him I'm not a domestic terrorist. And so the funny thing about that was the judge, normally those go like through an attorney, and the attorney like curates them and they go into a filing. Like it's almost unlikely that a judge would even care to read. They like, that's the part of the filing they skim over. What's the attorney summary? Oh, he's a good guy and has never been in trouble. All right, I've heard it before. But because they all got sent directly to the judge, he read every one, and he also responded with that sentencing memorandum.
Yeah.
That was the first time my attorneys had ever seen that anybody had ever seen that the judge actually replied to the people. And they were like,
yeah, I got a letter addressed to me.
They all felt
signed by the judge.
Every single person I've talked to felt like that was the most vindictive thing that that judge could do, to take all the people that support me and then send a letter basically saying, he's a bad guy. You don't really know who he is. He came to DC to do violence. That's
what my letter said.
And,
you don't know the facts of the case, and this guy's some really bad. And we're sorry that he's your friend, but we need to set an example because we can't have this kind of thing going on.
Yeah,
it's like, whoa, okay.
Never done that before.
Okay,
never done that before. In 37 years on the bench, he's never done that. But for me, he wanted to make sure the people that don't think I'm a criminal do think I'm a criminal. Yeah, that was fun. Okay, so Trump is moving at such like lightning speed. really, it's probably good that we're just doing like a slow dipping our toe in because it's going fast.
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to keep up.
So Trump has already scrubbed out the Pentagon's, all the different boards, education boards that they've got there. He's fired pretty much everyone. Oh, interesting little note. So do you remember a long time ago telling the story about going camping with my FBI agent friend?
Oh.
This is in summer of 2020.
I don't remember. Refresh me a little bit.
Well, we went camping and he was just telling me about all the corruption at the FBI and how they should shut it down. And I was like, well, maybe you should like quit or something.
I do remember that part. I don't remember who it was.
So anyways, yeah, this was back in the summer of 2020, but he's the one who said, we're getting ready to do a big domestic terrorism push. I was like, oh, you're finally going to go after BLM and Antifa. And he's like, no, not quite. And then he just didn't want to talk about it anymore.
Yeah, dang it.
Yeah, exactly. And that might be my handler.
Yeah.
I've thought that many times. It's kind of weird. Anyways, at that same trip was another guy named Matthew Lohmeyer. So Matthew wrote a book called Irresistible Revolution about Marxism in the U.S. military. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Space Force. So he got rolled out of the Space Force for lack of confidence of his ability to do his duty because he had quoted all these Secretary of Defense people with Marxist comments and had published this book with basically their own statements, right? They didn't like that. Well, Donald Trump ran into him at some event and he told Donald Trump his story and was like,
you're hired.
Well, yes. Yes. Was basically like, are you committed to doing the hard work of actually rooting out Marxism deep inside the military? He says, yes. And he got his contact information right there. Well, he got appointed as Undersecretary of the Air Force.
Whoa.
So this is a guy who he was in the Air Force, was fast tracked through the academy, had become a lieutenant colonel, was then part of the first wave of officers that came over to the Space Force and then got fired. Well, now he's their boss.
Dope.
When I saw that on the ticker on Newsmax when I was in prison, and I was like, Matthew Lohmeyer just got appointed Undersecretary of the Air Force, which everybody's like, who cares about the Undersecretary of the Air Force? I'm like, that's the guy who does all the work. Like, that's the guy who actually implements the policies and does the firing and the thing. And I'm like, the fact that he just got fired a couple years ago and now he's like, the people who fired him boss. I'm like, Trump is, those are one of those little things where it's like, oh, he's not just bringing in Kash Patel. Like, no, he's bringing in people like deep in the levels that are actually going to go do some of this cleaning up, like that are personally affected. Like this guy got fired, lack of confidence, lost his commission, his retirement and everything. And now he's been appointed as the undersecretary.
Right on.
Well, it just goes to show, like, I had a friend, Matt DeSilva, when we were in prison. He used to work with the NSA. A lot of really high-end guys in the J6 crowd. A lot of really good guys. He was a former military intelligence officer and everything. And he was like, well, typically what happens when you have a revolution like this is the one side that initially is started against ends up coming back pretty fast and gaining power. And that's kind of what I see is it's like, yeah, I mean, if you were part of a raid on Donald Trump's house, you might not be keeping your job. You know what I mean? Like if you orchestrated a raid on a praying grandma who was praying inside the Capitol, you might not be keeping your job.
Is that how they picked the 88 guys they had to fire? Whoever came to Mar-a-Lago?
That was some of them. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because it can't be lost in the greater conversation what we just went through like the last 4 years. And so there's a part of me, like as I'm walking around, going to Walmart, going to Costco, going to the gas station, and I'm just seeing people like going about their normal life. I'm like, this is cool. It's so great to be home. But we were not in a normal spot. We're still not. Right? Like,
no,
like the United States government came for me. They came for me with everything they had. They came for me.
Yep.
Right. Like you have to realize you're at a spot in the narrative of history where we're really at a turning point. But we were at the point to where if you put a meme out telling Democrats that they voted on Wednesday and not Tuesday, you could spend 7 months in prison. If you went to a political protest and somebody turned you in, you're going to spend some time in prison. right? If you are a Catholic and just want to pray the rosary in Latin, you're going to be spied on. If you're a parent who goes to school because a school board meeting because your kids are having a hard time with the DEI and the crazy sexual indoctrination, you might have your phones tapped. Like, this is where we were at. They would put you in prison, right? And they will take everything from you and call it their sacred duty and say they're deterring other people from speaking up. Like, that's been one of the harder things for me.
Yeah. Hold on. What's the first free speech? But we're going to deter people from free speech, and it's okay. It's their duty.
And that was the point of prosecuting so many January 6ers.
Yes.
It was to deter rallies and to deter,
free speech,
militias and whatever. Yeah, all of it. Like, because after January 6th, when they took off, I think, 2 million people off of Twitter that were conservatives. Like, they did a great service in the intent to do evil, just like so often happens, in Genesis chapter 50, where God says, I'll take what was intended as evil and turn it to good. By taking Donald Trump off Twitter, by taking 2 million conservatives off Twitter, you forced us into different ecosystems. You created, and by deleting Parler, you created Getter, you created Truth Social, you created X, right? Twitter went from in their control to clearly not. And you decentralize the conservative voice to where now you can't shut it off. It was one thing when you could just knock off Trump and knock off a bunch of his supporters, but now you're not going to knock off Gab and Getter and Truth and X. You know what I mean? Like, and Telegram.
They'll try.
And they'll try, but they've been very stymied. Like, and the biggest thing is, and Rumble versus YouTube, they just don't have the same ability to control as many as they did when it was just a few. So that's one of the benefits of this last 4 years. But you got to realize we were at a point where a cabal of people took the president of the United States of America off of a free speech platform.
Yeah.
And they took possibly some of our listeners off free speech platforms. They shadow banned you. They limited your reach, right? They put people in prison that had no business going to prison. Like, when we walk around and just everything's normal, I'm like, nothing is normal. You know what I mean? Like, we are so on the edge, and take it from someone who's gone to the front line and back. Like, it took a presidential pardon to get my freedom. Like, there wasn't any other remedy or relief, for what should have been.
That's the only reason that you are hearing Taylor's voice today, is because Donald Trump pardoned Taylor.
Yes. Like, you wouldn't be hearing me. I'd be walking around the track saying the same speech to a bunch of prisoners. So
your reach was a little bit limited there.
My reach was a little limited, yes. They were very weird about me having groups of people around me. Isn't that the guy that starts riots? But that is one of the weird things, is walking around and be like, people have to stand up.
Don't let him have a megaphone.
I was even having this conversation this morning about this podcast. I'm like, this is the most important thing I'm doing. I'm like, I can't be grandiose enough about it. Like, I don't know who this podcast will affect, who's going to listen to it, right? I know that the last time we did it, it sure affected me. And it definitely affected the handful of listeners that really stayed loyal and kept in communication with me all these years. And so I know that this podcast has the ability to change people's perspective, and that's all that we can really do. We're only as good as the information we have. We're only as good as the experience that we turn into wisdom. And, we have to be the solution. Like, we, the peasants, are the ones that have to live here. Like, it doesn't matter if it's Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Donald Trump. Like, we're the ones who have to get by day to day. And we have to start caring about some of these big picture issues, because they're not so big picture when they're in your front door. You might not care about the Patriot Act, but I do. And if you know me, you probably should care about it, because your phone calls got listened to because you knew me. Yeah. Right? So it's like, I mean, I do. We have to care about this stuff. Like, this is our country. And, your voice matters, your dollars matter, your eyeballs matter, your clicks matter, which brings me to the last website I wanted to promote is the website we started almost 5 years ago. It's dollarsvotelouder.com. You vote with your eyes, your dollars, and your clicks. And on that website, there's alternatives for conservative companies to replace some of the liberal companies that are out there, right? Try to redirect your money, right? Instead of supporting mainstream media, go support independent media like Peasants Perspective or, your favorite podcast or whatever. Like, vote with your eyes, your dollars, and your clicks for sure.
Yep.
All right, we're gonna wrap things up. Where are we at time wise?
Over an hour.
Oh, perfect timing. So again, we are going to slowly work our way back into the podcast. We're going to work out all of our technical kinks, but I know that for the few dedicated listeners, which actually ended up being a pretty good little opening day there. I don't know. Anyways, I was excited about that. A lot more than the 9 I was anticipating, so that's good.
Well, you never know who's listening.
Yeah, those Virginia ones, I get real suspicious. Yeah. I remember after January 6th, it was like Arlington. It was in some other town right next to D.C. It was like D.C. And I'm like,
Well, maybe we'll prick a few hearts.
Yeah. They were taking notes for the grand jury.
Yeah.
That's what they were doing.
Great.
Anyways, okay, so dollarsvotelouder.com, and you can go help with Left Behind and Without.org, where you can help children with incarcerated parents. And then, of course, you can subscribe to this podcast at our Buzzsprout website, which is buzzsprout.com/2450662.
That rolls off your tongue.
It rolls off your tongue. And you can also support me directly at GiveSendGo, givesendgo.com/
Whoa.
givesendgo.com/GEJWJ, or you can just go in there and search for Taylor John Attacks and it'll find me in there. All right, you guys, thank you so much. And last thing, you can find me on Twitter at Gone4Months is my vanity name. That's what we were calling vanity name, Twitter or handle.
Handle.
That was the other word, handle. Yes. All right. We'll talk to you guys later. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.